Blessings. 2. Kiel Harbor was the biggest town we had passed through in more than a year, maybe even longer. Gilneas' largest port, besides Gilneas City itself, which didn't count because its docks weren't that big, it was bustling. Still small compared to anything from my last life, maybe somewhere between 10 and 13,000 people living in the town. Nothing compared to the 100,000 that made up the town I'd lived in before. It put into perspective just how big everything had gotten as time moved on in my old world. Gilneas had a population of maybe 7 million people in total. I didn't know how many people lived elsewhere in Lordaeron or Strom. I knew Dalaran was a big city, and Gilneas sold them a lot of food since we were neighbors, but how many people lived there, I didn't know. Another thing that put things into perspective was the smell. As soon as we had gotten close to the city, I had started pinching my nose shut. It was just that bad. Not just the smell of piss and feces, ever present in any town of reasonable size, but the stink of fish that was truly overpowering. I was rather torn between the fact the smell of fish made me hungry, and the fact it was not a pleasant smell to be stuck around for long periods of time. And then there was the fact it made me want a good and proper fish and chips. If Azeroth had potatoes, I would find them, and then I would introduce Gilneas' new national dish. No question, I had a new goal in life. "Keep a hold of my hand, Gwen," Mama told me as we headed into the market. "And your pack too." Nodding seriously, I stepped closer to Mama. It would be easy to get knocked about with all these people around. "Can we see the ships, Mama?" I asked. "After we meet your friend." I wondered if there were any Kultiran ships in the harbor. I remember they were our economic rival before Gen closed the country. Until King Greymane closed the country by building the Greymane Wall. It hadn't happened yet, I was pretty sure of that. The Second War had. I remember hearing people talk about soldiers who went to fight the big green monsters, tall as the giants of old, which had to be orcs, but what year it was wasn't something I knew. "If there's still light, then yes," Mama answered. "I see the inn she stays at just ahead." The inn was much like many others, and not one of the nicer ones. A typical stagecoach inn, with a pretty boring pair of dangling wagon wheels serving as a sign, and one of 3 I'd already seen in Kiel, fairly old and with a lot of stables for stagecoach horses. The stagecoaches and their inns were the fastest way to travel, but not terribly pleasant. I'd only experienced it the once, as it was how we ended up in the headlands to begin with. Lord Kendron needed a plant witch to stop a blight that was ruining his wife's rose garden. So that, with Mama being the first his men found, meant we got stuffed in a carriage and shuttled all the way up to his manor at the tip of the headlands. 2 miserable weeks in a bumpy and cramped carriage because a noble wanted his wife's garden to be fixed before she got home. Mama managed it, and we got paid in actual gold coins, which made up for the journey, I guess. The last month and a half of slowly trekking down and through the headlands wasn't too bad either. It was nice seeing people who had the same traditions as us for once, even if they were still stupidly superstitious. As Mama opened the door, we were greeted by the sound of music cutting over the bustle outside. A harp was sitting on a raised platform playing for the pleasure of the customers. There were so many voices, people talking, that I couldn't tell what kind of tune it was meant to be, but it wasn't bad. The common room itself was lit by the wide glass windows and 2 roaring fireplaces, which also made the change in temperature palatable. It was getting into autumn outside and the heat was a nice change. A few people glanced at us as we entered, but their gaze didn't linger. A woman traveling alone wasn't normal by any means, but at the same time it wasn't taboo or improper the way it might have been in medieval Europe. I knew Mama got some fuss over who my father was. I certainly didn't know, but she always brushed it off, spinning a story for why he was absent. It was never the same twice. "She's not here yet, but I see the person she came here to meet," Mama said over the mixed inn, pointing out a table with an elderly woman and a young man sitting to talk. "Old Grimsby, and Rockwood, I think. Haven't seen him since he was your age." I mumbled, tucking myself closer into Mama's skirts. The warmth was nice, but all the voices were grating. I didn't do well with so many people around. It made it hard to hear my own thoughts. Made it hard to tell my thoughts apart from all the voices. Well, well, look who the crow dug up, the old lady said as Mama slid into the seat opposite the two. You remember Erwin, Rook? Used to be one of mine before she got herself pregnant. The woman's eyes bored into me appraisingly. And I see this would be the result of that. Erwin, Rook, or Rockwards, said as he rubbed at the hairs on his chin. You mean the flower girl? Flower girl? You mean the girl who wore nothing but flowers? Grimsby cackled. It's good to see you, Erwin. And you, little one. She has been taught, yes? It's a pleasure to see you again, Grims, Mama said with more than a little hesitation. I saw the hint of a blush on her face. Serves her right for telling everyone about my mishaps. I'm here looking for Celestine. She still comes here every 4th moon, I hope. Don't have time for an old lady. Grimsby shook her head. What about you, little one? You have the manners your mother lacks. You were rude, I told her bluntly. I'm Gwyneth, but normally just Gwen. And Mama taught me lots. Your mother was rude first, she retorted, giving me a vicious stink eye that made me glance away. Enough that she's looking for her generation's prodigy. Her fingers started drumming on the table. For all her grey hair and wrinkles, she was as animated as someone much younger. Those Yarrow girl? Good choice, sensible. Interesting that they'd look alive. Mama dropped her hand on the table loudly. Does Celestine come here still or not? She demanded. She does. Rook nodded. What? It's a simple question and costs us nothing, grandmother. Costs us leverage! Bah, probably caught up in the sights you saw, stupid boy. Grimsby flagged a hand at her grandson. Celestine will be here after dusk. Spent more time with her husband of late. They settled down near here. Rook stood, pushing his chair back. I can show you the way to her home if you'd like, he asked, almost pleadingly. I looked between him and Mama. I really didn't want to stay here much longer. It was getting to be too much. This was a much busier inn than the ones we usually visited, and I didn't like it. Was I supposed to say something about the prices of Lordanian wheat going up? Complain about... no, that was another table's conversation. 2 different ones. My head hurt. It had been Rook. He had offered and... oh, there was red on his cheeks. And... I couldn't deny that Mama was pretty. She wasn't old, somewhere in her 20s. Ew, I said as I came to my realization. Don't think of my Mama like that. But... Grimsby started cackling louder, drawing the attention from nearby tables. Oh, that's funny, girl. What have you been teaching her at that age? She can't be more than 9. 8, I mumbled, feeling dazed and finding it hard to focus on the conversation next to me with so many going on in the background. Nothing like the sort you are thinking of, Mama answered, giving me a look I recognized. One that said she didn't know where I'd learned something, but she desperately wanted to know. She's very clever for her age. My stupid grandson has offered his assistance. You might as well take it. Grimsby waved her hand dismissively. Boy has no balls to act on his thoughts regardless of how inappropriate they get. Mama took in a deep breath and calmly let it go. Thank you, Lady Grims. We'll take you up on that offer, Rook. She wrapped an arm around me. I don't think the atmosphere here agrees with my daughter. A good tidings be with you, Mama said as she stood, bowing her head slightly to Grimsby. Good tidings, I repeated dazedly. My head felt like an echoing cathedral with far too many people inside, all trying to be heard. It was hard to walk straight. As we moved outside, Mama picked me up. I wasn't small enough for her to do it easily anymore, and I never tried to make her, but she did it out of her own accord. I clung on to her as we followed Rook out of town. I'd forgotten just how bad enclosed spaces with so many people could be. It was them speaking, the conversations. It was just too much to process. "Mama," I said quietly after we had gotten out of town and were walking down a country road again. "I don't like noisy inns." "I know," she whispered back, her breath short from carrying me. "You never have, not even as a baby." "Would you like me to take her for a bit, Miss "No," Mama snapped at Rook, having to take a moment before speaking more calmly. "No, I'll carry my daughter myself until she can walk again. Thank you for the offer, but it's unneeded." Her arms grew tighter around me, holding me close. Celestine, and away from the inn I vaguely recall that name from somewhere, had a holding about an hour outside Kiel Harbor. A little complex of half a dozen buildings, one large house and 3 small cottages besides a large barn and stables. The fields around the place were flourishing, the harvest already underway, and it was clear she was going to have a much better one than all her neighbors. Not surprising considering she was like me and Mama, but a bit strange she was being so blatant. "Thank you for the escort, Rook," Mama said tiredly. I'd started walking on my own again after a short while, but it still winded her. You can call me Rookwood, ma'am," he said, scratching the back of his head. "Grandmother calls me that 'cause she thinks Dad's name is He looked at me for a moment. "Poor?" he finished lamely. "Piss," I said blandly, getting the exact bemused reaction I wanted. "What? I know what you were going to say. Just because I know all the swear words doesn't mean I'll use them." "Except to provoke a reaction," Mama said fondly. "What was your first time? I can't recall. It's been 9 years, and it's Arcadius. Dad pulled it out of some old myth." He shrugged. "It just sounds pretentious to me. Never liked it. Rookwood's better." For a moment I was distracted, something odd in the ground. Like the ground was waking up? No, not quite. Someone was talking to it, or asking it a question and getting an answer. It had responded like an old dog perking up at its master's voice, or at least felt like it. Familiar and eager to listen for whatever was asked. It was tempting to poke it. "Arky," I decided. "Thanks. You're not terrible, even if you want to do stuff with Mama." He flushed a bright red and looked away. "Was just doing a good deed. I'll be off now. Good tidings, ma'am, miss." "Good tidings be with you," Mama told him as he went. While we spoke, a woman had come out of the main house. She looked about Mama's age, with sheer black hair and piercing brown eyes. She put a hand on her hip as she looked at us, and I felt something from the ground again. This time I did poke it back. A little bit of magic sent back along the channel. It felt inviting, curious, and so very, very big. The last part wasn't unusual. Touching nature to use magic always felt big. Because it was big. A single tiny human body compared to the vast expanse of the world wasn't a comparison on the same scale. It was the way the local spirit was familiar with a witch's touch to the point of almost tame that was weird. Not that I actually believed it was tame. That would be stupid and dangerous. If it wanted to, it could ignore me, or break me in two. But it was friendly, and it didn't want to. Celestine, whom the woman had to be, jumped in surprise as soon as I touched the spirit. But rather than alarm, a wide smile grew on her face. "This is quite a surprise, Erwin. How long's it been, girl? And a little one who's quite impressive too. This is what your mysterious stranger..." "Don't," Mama said, cutting her off. I don't like to think about what happened. My Gwyneth came from that, but nothing else good did." "You certainly were obsessed with him back then," Celestine said flatly. "You're saying it went sour?" "I'm saying he's gone, and that's that." "Mama," I tugged at her sleeve. "Don't fight. We came all the way to meet her." Celestine clicked her tongue. Girl's right, you came all this way for a reason. You're kin and we parted on good enough terms, though I can't say I don't begrudge you for keeping to yourself all these years. She stopped for a moment, giving Mama a chance to speak, but she didn't. Well, you might as well come in. If you're going to stay the night, and you will be, you can help prepare dinner. We'll talk when you're ready. She walked up and put a hand on Mama's shoulder. Shouldn't have stirred up old misgivings. It's good to see you again, cousin. Cousin? I blurted out. I have cousins? Mama flinched, but it was Celestine who answered. Yep, myself, my little brother and 2 tiny ones. One's just learning to walk. She took one of my hands and started leading me inside. It's a good chance for you to get to know your family. She's not much of a conversationalist, but who is at that age? Gwen was, Mama said quietly, moving up and taking my other hand. It was awkward, but Mama was feeling stressed, so I put up with it. I really didn't like it, and not knowing why made it worse. Celestine went to her meeting at the coaching inn before Mama filled up to explaining why we were here, and long before she got back it was time for me to sleep. No matter how much I might have wanted to stay awake to know what they were talking about, an 8-year-old body just wasn't up for it. A little after we broke our fast, meeting Celestine's husband Robin and his 2 brothers who all worked their shared family farm, Celestine took me outside, towards a small plot of trees in the enclosure of their holding, one I could feel had been influenced by magic over the years. Not unnaturally, but prodded here and there, asking not to interfere with one another, or to grow just a little bit over so they'd make for a good shelter. How long did this take? I asked, seeing something out more expected from the night elves than a harvest witch. I blinked, thinking of their future name, cause we weren't called that yet, pulled up from where I'd heard of Celestine before. She was the druid trainer for the Worgen starting zone. It must have been years to get him to grow like this. Uh-huh, she agreed. Robin started courting me about, a year and a half after your mother left with this stranger. Took a while before I was interested in settling down, but he's good folk. His brothers too. They let me do my work in peace and reap the rewards of it. She gestured towards the bountiful fields. Quite literally. It was his willingness to let me continue my work that won me over in the end. So, 9 months from Mama being pregnant with me, 8 years and 3 months from my age, and a year and a half after Mama left. About 7 then? Or close to 6, since that'd be when he let you start working, I said, trying to figure it out. Sounds right. She nodded and sat on the roots of one of her trees, bringing her closer to my height as she looked me in the eye. Do you know why Erwin, your mother, came to me? It was fairly obvious. Mama didn't think she could teach me anymore. You're a better witch than she is. She thinks you can teach me where she can't, I said quietly. The words felt like a betrayal. I knew they were true and I wanted to learn, but they didn't change how I felt. Quite. Now I already know you've got a good sense. Wouldn't have noticed me spying on you as you came to the farm yesterday if you didn't. But what can you do? Celestine asked, patting on the ground to get me to sit. Erwin wasn't the clearest. You can heal, you can grow plants. Have you done anything with the lunar phases? I shook my head. Mama said it wasn't the right time. Celestine scoffed. Your mother was never good at the astral parts of our magic. Or any of them, went unsaid. She can only manage the spells under very specific conditions. Needs a full moon to pull on the moon's light at all. She's still a witch, I spouted, unable to stop myself from defending her. If Celestine was just going to keep bath-mouthing Mama, I didn't want to learn from her. She just chuckled and put a hand on my hair, mussing it. She is. None of us are mighty like the wizards of Dalaran, or grand heroes like the paladins of the Silver Hands, nor are we revered like the priests of the light. We're all just witches, great and small, doing our part to keep the old ways alive and our people well. She smiled. It was soft and comforting. Your mother's done good work, going around to more out-of-the-way places and helping people. She's one of us, and let no one, not even a damn old lady, say otherwise. Good, I harumphed. I didn't bother trying to stop her mussing my hair. It's not like it didn't work and it only encouraged her. Probably. It was kind of nice, actually. Did you grow up with Mama? Yes and no. We lived nearby to each other. We're all locals to Kiel one way or another, but my mother's family was across the bight on the northern side. She was a third daughter and her father's a light follower. When Erwin showed an interest in the old ways, even used them, he got mad, toughed her out. My mother took her in. Celestine closed her eyes, reminiscing. We weren't quite sisters, but we were close. Learned under old Grimms how to use our talents. So that's why Mama never mentioned my grandparents, I mumbled. It's not a happy story, but we're here for a lesson, to see just how good you are. I wouldn't mind a little help around the farm, or with my work with the locals. Townsfolk pay a pretty penny to magic away their ills if you can be discreet enough. What followed was several hours of Celestine seeing how I worked, the crutches I used, and explaining my methodology. The fact I got things to work at all without proper instructions impressed her, though she tutted over my use of yarrow flowers for healing. Not the rave itself. Apparently I had a bit of magic in it that made my healing stronger with how I'd used it, but with me having to take a flower and crush it to get the magic to flow right. I learned a lot, but it was clear there would be many, many more lessons to come. By the end of it, I got the feeling she was somewhat impressed, which had to be good.